Well, Harmon, we've known each other for about 3 months,
We
and
have.
here we are in the internationally known office
That's right.
with the beautiful world map behind you. It's been a difficult several years for you, Harmon. People who haven't been watching America's First Refugee may not realize that you're living here outside of Christchurch, New Zealand, away from your wife, away from your children.
Yes.
You're a man without a nation. Immigration New Zealand refuses to grant you citizenship. They refuse to allow you to leave the country.
Any status at all, really.
You've had to relinquish your citizenship as a United States citizen. Go over that with us briefly again. Why did you have to do that?
Well, when we first arrived here in 2001, I had my passport. I had my U.S. passport. I think I've said in previous ones, but I'll say it again. We had to flee North America. We wouldn't have never have left Canada if Canada hadn't colluded with the U.S. to try to arrest me again and continue to punish me for having blown the whistle on the CIA and the U.S. government.
And forgive me, I should take us back to that, because what I'd really like to do right now, we've done a lot of episodes of America's First Refugee, and I'd like for this to be kind of an unscripted, off-the-cuff overview of everything that's happened to you. So let me take you back to the very beginning, because you were, of course, in the U.S. Air Force. You were a missile specialist, is that it?
Aircraft weapons specialist.
And so that got you a top secret clearance?
That's right. Well, the top secret really came along. I mean, I started out with a top secret, but it was really top secret when I started working with nuclear weapons. But generally speaking, the secrecy of what I was doing was weapons systems on tactical aircraft, starting out with the F-100s, the F-4s. We actually did some training on the B-52s. But when we arrived in England, or when I arrived in England, and we were on F-100s for probably about 6 months, the F-100s were phased out, and the new F-111s came in, the swing-wing bomber. And that one was actually computerized. It was the first systems that were ever computerized. We had to go through computer school and all sorts of other training on that, and then we started working on the F-111s, which you could hang nuclear bombs on, and there was all sorts of things that we had to deal with.
And you told me that you voluntarily entered the Air Force. This was Vietnam era.
That's right.
Pretty bold. You were in university. You didn't have to go into the military, right?
That's correct. That's correct.
Why did you do that?
Well, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do and what I wanted to be, which is not uncommon for someone who's 18, 19 years old and, first in university. I took several courses just to sort of try to decide what I wanted to do. I went from chemical engineering to biology to just a number of things, and I finally just decided I'd had enough. I needed to do something different. I didn't want to be in school, at least at that point in time. My father my parents couldn't afford to put me in, so I was working full-time at the Goodyear Fiber Technical Center at the time. It was a chemical lab where we did physical and chemical testing.
But you were a kid. What was your expertise in physical and chemical testing?
I went to Goodyear when I was 18 years old. When I first started working there, I got trained up. I guess I trained up pretty quickly. I mean, I can't say I was all that clever, but they liked what I was doing. So ultimately, I started out in tire physical testing, and then all of a sudden, I ended up in chemical labs there, and I was doing everything from running 2 or 3 floor reactors. They actually had reactors. They were building polymers. In fact, those were the days when Goodyear actually came out with the first plastic bottle. These ones that you consider normal, sort of the large liter Coke bottles nowadays. We actually produced some of the first ones out of some of the polymers and plastics that we were working with then, working with some of the engineers. So it was an interesting job, but I was doing that from 4 to midnight, and sometimes midnight to 8. I was on night shifts, and I was going to school full time during the day.
You were in college, right?
Yeah, university, yeah.
And was that your area of expertise, chemistry?
Interestingly enough, I knew that I could do anything I wanted to. I just needed to decide what I wanted to do, and at that point in time, I just didn't know. I mean, I took courses for about a semester and a half, almost 2 semesters, and I just decided I didn't know what I wanted to do, so it was easier for me to just go into the military, spend time overseas. I mean, I wanted to travel, and then come back and hopefully by then I would have made up my mind what I wanted to do. But I didn't want to be a Army or Marines. I didn't want to, oddly enough, I didn't want to shoot anybody. I didn't want to hurt anybody. So I thought, all right, how about the U.S. Air Force? You know, they're not out there with guns shooting at people. So I went to the U.S. Air Force recruiter and I said, look, test me, see what I'm good at. Mm-hmm. And so they put me through, gosh, multiple tests. They put me through mathematics and hydraulics and pneumatics and mechanical stuff, administration. I must have taken a barrage of about 6 to 8 different areas of testing. And when I went back to see the guy, he said, well, interestingly enough, you've pretty much aced all of them, which is very unusual. So what we need right now is someone in the area of weaponry. And I said, well, and listen, I already told you I'm not interested in shooting anybody. And he said, no, this is in the area of the technical side of weaponry, you know, the computers and all the other stuff that go with it. He said, so we can train you up in that, but you'll never be in the field, so to speak. So I said, well, okay, if that's where you want to put me. So they put me in sort of the electronic side and some of that stuff. So I went into the service. I went through my basic training. And then I got orders for aircraft weaponry. Well, I got to thinking about that and thinking, geez, you know, this is called, I don't have to see the weapons when they strike people, but this isn't just shooting one person. This is well, ultimately it was weapons of mass destruction, if you think about it.
You know.
So I turned those orders down. You were allowed to turn the orders down once, and then I waited 6 weeks, and my next set of orders was the same thing, so I couldn't turn it down. So I went on to Lowry Air Force Base in Denver, and I started my training, and it was extensive training. And everything from rockets and bombs and missiles, and ultimately it was also nuclear weapons, but it wasn't, at least at that point. I didn't train for that until later. Guns, you name it. We had to be able to strip them down. We had to be able to fix everything in the aircraft, all the electronics, all the pneumatics, all the hydraulics, all the mechanics.
It's extensive
We
training.
were specialists in the field. I mean, if it came down to it, there was an area of expertise under my career field called EOD, which is Explosive Ordnance Disposal, where if an airplane landed and it was in trouble, or if it crashed or whatever, we were the guys that were sent out into the field to take all the weapons off of it. Even if it had crashed and was on fire or whatever, we had to de-arm the stuff and take the weapons off. Fortunately, I never had to do anything like that because I wasn't sent. I was very lucky. Once I trained, we were expecting to be sent to either Thailand or Vietnam, because this was in 1969, 1970, when Vietnam was full on. And Thailand was also where a lot of the air bases were, where a lot of the strike forces were that went into Vietnam. Mm-hmm. But I sort of wised up. I saw that a lot of the guys that were putting in for stateside right after basic training and technical training, they would stay stateside for 6 months and then they'd go straight to Vietnam.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, all right, I will ask for overseas in Europe right out of basic. I went on a 30-day leave to go home, and I got orders for, I put in for Germany first and England second. It wasn't the UK back then, it was England. And I got England. So I went straight to England, and then I was part of the Strategic Air Force, which is, there's the SAC, which is Strategic Air Command, and there's the Tactical Air Command, which is TAC. Tactical was the smaller planes, mm-hmm. For close-in strike force and so on. Strategic was the bigger bombers, the long-range bombers for nuclear weapons and all that sort of stuff. So I went to Europe, and I was put in SAC, which was the Strategic Air Command. Now, interestingly enough, right after I got there, we had the F-100s that we were working on, which was more of a tactical aircraft, and those were phased out, and we got in the F-111s, which could do both. The F-111s, if you put the wings out, they were swing-wing bomber. Wings straight out, they were strategic. They could fly long distances, and you know, like from England down to Middle East or whatever, and then they could fly back.
Wow.
Or they could put the wings back. I mean, I'm sorry. If the wings were out, they could fly close air support. If the wings were back, they could fly in incredible speeds and go long distance. So they could do both.
Wow.
So that's what I trained on, and that's what I was doing when I was over in England. But ultimately, it was became nuclear weapons before I got out. So the joke was on me, wasn't it?
Well, but point being, you had very sophisticated training,
I did.
but you weren't actually in combat.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
So at
At
what
least
point,
not in close proximity, anyway.
right. And so at what point in your military career were you approached by the CIA?
Oh, that was well beyond my actual time in the Air Force.
Okay, so in 1969, 1970, you're in England, and then
I got out in 1973. That was my 4 years. Went back to Ohio, finished my university. But at that point in time, I really knew what I wanted. I wanted business. So I finished up a business degree, BSBA in marketing and finance. And then then I got a job with IBM out in Denver.
what were you doing there?
I was a marketing specialist, and I had a territory in downtown Denver, which was the banking territory. They literally gave me the entire banking sector in downtown Denver, which was
I see.
quite exciting.
And so is that where you gained your expertise in financial matters?
Part of it, yeah. Although I was more marketing than finance, I actually put together a lot of what you call financial selling skill programs, and I did a lot of training of a lot of the salespeople to show them how to sell to financial institutions rather than just the feature function benefit thing. I actually showed them how to show people how to make money with this equipment and how to be the most efficient in making money in replacement programs for equipment and so on. And that was quite good. And after 5 years of that, or nearly 5 years, they were going to promote me to Minneapolis. I didn't really want to go to Minneapolis. I'd been up there during snowstorms to give presentations. So I decided to leave IBM and start my own business in real estate development. I got a license to do real estate brokerage, made a lot of money, started buying land, and I did that for a number of years. But it was in the 90s, it was after the real estate market blowout and the oil market blowout in sort of the late 80s, early 90s, that I decided to go international because I had a lot of experience in finance. And when I was in the middle of that move is when I was the CIA made contact with me in a very unusual way. I mean, the guy that called me was interested in some of the products that I had available. I had
IBM products?
No. I had created a database of land and real estate available around the world. I started putting together as a global real estate specialist, and this guy was interested in projects and land in the Bahamas, and I had another guy who was also interested in the possibility of selling some land in the Bahamas. So I started working with this guy to put a deal together, and then eventually he said, well, look, that's not really why I've contacted you. I'm a former Navy SEAL. I work for the CIA. We've been watching you. We've been seeing what you're doing. We know you have a top secret security clearance, so that you're already cleared for what we want to do, and we would like your help from a financial perspective.
And do you think it was that straightforward? They knew that you were in the military. They knew you had expertise in these various areas, top secret security clearance.
Yes.
Just nothing more than that.
Nothing that I could see, at least at that time. I mean, as I began to put things together in later years, it seemed to me that there was a lot of, as we've called our interviews, there was a lot of preponderance of evidence that wasn't a coincidence.
Right. Right.
You know, coincidence or preponderance of evidence. Things began to cause me to scratch my head a little bit and say, well, wait a minute, while that was going on, I was introduced to the Rothschild family, and did they really know that? Were they surveilling me at the time? It's hard to tell nowadays.
How did you get introduced to the Rothschild family? Talk about
It
that.
was locally in Colorado Springs, oddly enough. One of the members of the family lived in Colorado, and I had a fellow call me up again, interested in some of the stuff that I was doing from the real estate perspective, came to visit with me, found out that I was and I'll say at this point, I was a Christian businessman, you know, and this guy was also very much a Christian businessman, and he started asking me about a lot of my beliefs and said, wow, you know, you would be really compatible with the principal that I work for. I would like to bring him over and introduce him to you.
That was the CIA guy.
No, this was a local fellow who had just called me up to ask me to work with him on. I think he was even looking for some office space locally. He had lots of reasons why he wanted to talk to me, so I said, well, why not? Come on over. And he was the one who brought his boss in, who turned out to be one of the members of the Rothschild family.
Can you say?
So that's what I was interested in that. But at the same time, it had been just a couple of months before that I was contacted by the CIA guy, who also wanted me to help them out with doing doing some financial work on these financial instruments that they wanted to transact. And then, as it turned out, the Rothschild family had a trust in Liechtenstein that would work perfectly for this. So here we go, putting two and two together.
So they sort of basically, possibly, had you introduced to this Rothschild. So why would they do that? If they know the Rothschilds, why did they need you there?
I think they couldn't do it directly. In fact,
Were you a patsy? Were they setting you up?
No, I don't think so. I think they knew that I had the expertise and they didn't. And I don't think the Rothschild family, as I look back on it, the Rothschild family wouldn't have been receptive to them at all.
To the CIA?
That's right.
Why not? I thought they run it.
Well, I don't think they did at the time. I think there was a lot of introductions going on, and they were trying to make their way on the inside because they really knew about these instruments. They wanted to do something with them. They'd been trying to do something with them, according to
the CIA.
The CIA, according to my handler, who's ultimately became my handler. They'd been working on this stuff for the last 2 or 3 decades to try to privately transact this stuff.
We're talking about these bearer bonds,
That's
right?
right. That's right.
How did the CIA get a hold of them?
These were originally issued to Central American countries. This particular one was Guatemala.
And they're issued by the U.S. government?
No, they were issued by the Mitsubishi Bank of Japan.
For
And
what purpose,
that goes back to Japan still being held a bit hostage over what they'd done during World War II and all the money that they'd taken out of all the different banks out of the different countries that they'd attacked and taken over. And so Japan was still trying to pay back what they'd done. And so somewhere between the U.S. government, Rothschilds, I was told ultimately, they were asked to cooperate with helping other countries around the world by issuing these things quietly and helping these other countries out. Now, I'm told that when these were issued, they were issued to Central American countries, and the heads of those countries, being as corrupt as you could imagine, didn't really use them the way they were supposed to use them. They were supposed to use them to borrow money against and so on and help them with their country's infrastructures. They were taking this money and putting them in Swiss bank accounts and opening them up and using them personally. So the money ultimately became tainted.
Let me slow you down for a second.
Sure.
Because I don't know that much about bearer bonds and financial instruments or whatever. So we've got the Mitsubishi Bank of Japan, and we understand that that's a bank. We've got, you said Ecuador, was it?
No, Guatemala.
Guatemala, sorry. So we've got Guatemala. And did Japan ever invade Guatemala? Why is Mitsubishi giving Guatemala bank?
Well, I think because the U.S., I think, wanted to help the Central American countries out, they wanted to get a way to get them money, and the U.S. didn't want to give it to them themselves. I think, frankly, Japan became a bit of a piggy bank, if you want to call it that.
In the 90s, their economy was booming.
Well, but in the 60s, in the late 60s, when things were still a bit rough, and it wasn't that far beyond World War II, they were still picking on Japan a little bit and forcing them to do things with their banks and so on to try to pay some of this back. So this was sort of Japan still owed the world some things. So I think the U.S. government probably got involved in that, and ultimately I was told even the Rothschilds got involved in that to get some of this stuff issued to help some of these other countries out.
Wow. So a little bit of financial arm twisting going on.
That's exactly right. That's a better way of putting it.
It's difficult to really understand what this whole situation is all about, but okay. So the Mitsubishi Bank of Japan is asked to issue these bearer bonds to Guatemala.
That's right.
And Guatemala says, hey, thanks. And then what is that? Is it a loan, the bearer bond?
Well, it's an
Guatemala
agreement.
pays nothing for it?
It's an agreement to pay, and it has an interest rate attached to it. But it's something that Japan would really never have to how can I put this? Guatemala was issued these bonds that they could borrow against. Japan would just leave them out there. This is my understanding now. Guatemala would never have to pay it back.
Who is Guatemala borrowing from? Not Mitsubishi. They say we have this bond. Somebody else lent us
They're borrowing
money.
against the bond.
The value of the bond.
The value of the bond
Collateral.
of which Japan allows them to use as collateral. That's right. Or the Mitsubishi Bank of Japan.
This whole thing sounds like a scheme to invent money out of nothing.
Yeah, which is why the CIA was attracted to it so much, because ultimately what I didn't realize I was doing was helping the CIA set up an opportunity to utilize these bonds. I mean, once the bonds got tainted, then they weren't supposed to be transacted any further.
So they got tainted because the leaders of the countries were
They misused them.
misusing the funds.
They misused the
weren't
funds. They
using them
misused
to
the.
rebuild their
That's
countries.
right.
They just said, we have this bond,
That's right.
we borrow a lot of money, buy a Mercedes, buy a mansion.
That's right. So ultimately, the bonds weren't completely shut down, which was kind of curious to me. They were just sort of sitting there,
Who would
open-ended.
shut it down? The Mitsubishi Bank?
Well, Mitsubishi said they wouldn't fund on it anymore because they've been misused, and yet they were still open-ended bonds. They were still sitting there.
So someone potentially is forcing the Mitsubishi Bank to put this bond out there that people can borrow against from other unwitting banks who say, oh, it's a legitimate bond from Japan.
That's right.
And now we've got this thing hanging out there for 50 years and it sort of comes home to roost and they call you.
That's right. Because the CIA had been utilizing, now things get interesting. The CIA, through Oliver North, what we found out when we started checking out the first bond, had actually been using some of the interest coupons to fund Iran-Contra and to fund arms deals through Iran, through the Sandinistas in Central America.
So really what we're doing here is peering into an extremely complex financial scheme.
That's right.
That the CIA may have been cooking for 50 years. And during World War II, the time frame you're talking about is when the CIA was established. So this is a mechanism that they sort of put in place in the beginning to fund
Yes.
who knows what going forward. And just like the people who said, we don't need 4 spaces for the date, when is that ever going to be a problem?
Well, imagine now, again, I'm extrapolating a little bit, so go there with me for the moment.
Sure.
Here's a scenario. Imagine the Sandinistas, which was El Salvador. Imagine them.
Nicaragua.
Or Nicaragua, that's right. And imagine they're saying to the CIA, and the CIA is down there trying to help them out. They need to get them arms. Mm-hmm. And the CIA are well connected with all of the Central American countries.
The CIA was helping the Contras
That's
in
right.
Nicaragua.
That's right. They were helping them out. They were trying to get them arms, okay? And the CIA is connected to these different Central American countries, and somebody in Guatemala comes up and says, hey, what about this? What about this bond? We've had these around for years, but we can't seem to do anything with them anymore. Can you guys do anything with them? If you think you can, we'll sign them over to you. And out of the 34 bonds that were there out of Central America, again, the CIA tells me they got 11 bonds assigned to them. This was the first one, and they came to me and said, can you transact this privately? Because they knew that through any government, no government would touch them.
So can I extrapolate a little bit?
Sure.
Because it sounds a little bit more to me like the CIA might have known exactly who had them and when they needed to go get them. And they have ways of convincing people to do things and give them things like maybe killing them and taking them.
Oh, listen, I was told that, ultimately I was told, and I wasn't told this up front, I was told, first of all, that this was going to be used for humanitarian purposes for Guatemala, because they needed a lot of roads and bridges and infrastructure and so on that had been destroyed by hurricanes over the years. And I was really quite excited for that. I even flew down to Florida and looked at different projects that mayors had come up with through the Vatican, through the Archbishop of Guatemala, who brought these projects up. And so I was looking at helping do all these things and build all these things, but ultimately it was about that sort of that was sort of the smoke and mirrors side of things. They were doing some good, but ultimately it was about creating a quantity of money, a CIA covert bank.
That nobody knows where it came from.
Nobody knew where it came from. It was completely unaccountable to Congress or anybody else, where they could go and get things done as a covert operation and not be answerable to anyone.
And they need huge sums, billions.
Well, that's what they got, whether they needed it or not.
Okay, so I'm getting a better handle on how the banking aspect worked. So you're introduced to a member of the Rothschilds family, and they have a trust in Liechtenstein. And what is the trust's role? You come to them with
this is what the CIA came to me and they said, look, can you transact these through one or more private trusts that you're aware of? We can't do it through governments. That's not possible. But if we can do it through some private trusts.
Did you ask them why that was not possible?
No. At the time, I was more interested in doing the humanitarian thing.
Wow.
So I was a bit naive. But ultimately I wasn't so naive, because when we started checking the notes out, and we had to literally do a history of where the coupons had been used, where the notes had been, who had the notes in their possession, all of that has to be done before you can get something like this through the Bank of International Settlement and through the Federal Reserve.
Now, you were dealing with this in the 1990s, you said? 1991? When was this?
I was first
1999.
I was first contacted by the CIA, and interestingly enough, within a month or two, by these guys that introduced me to the Rothschilds. In 1995, I think, end of 1995 was when I was first contacted by the CIA, and then in 1996, I was introduced to this Rothschild fellow. The CIA also gave me a lead on another trust that they wanted me to check out, which was the Bay State Trust, which was another Liechtenstein trust. So all of this happened by the end of 1995 to the middle of 1996, where I ended up in Zurich in 1996 by the summer, talking to these trusts and seeing whether or not they could do the deal.
But my point being, Oliver North would have been having these things in his possession in the
70s.
late 70s and
That's
early
right.
1980s.
That's
so
right.
the CIA had control of these things for a long time.
You say control. They didn't really have control
They had
of
the
the principal.
coupon.
They had they were utilizing the coupons. How they managed to do that, and what banks managed to allow them to do that, I don't know. I have no information on that.
Oliver North was obviously operating in Nicaragua, and these things were issued to these. See, now we're getting a picture of maybe why were they interested in helping the Contras and the Sandinistas, and why we were there in the first place. If they're trying to get these billions, perhaps this was a war over secret bearer bonds.
My gut tells me nowadays, with all the stories that are out there that around the Clintons and around the cocaine running and so on, is up to the point where these bonds were introduced into the deal, they were running cocaine. In fact, that Barry, what was the guy's? Barry Seal was running cocaine back and forth. They got him involved. And as you know, even in the movie, they revealed that Oliver North was involved in that.
Right.
I mean, that was really not just risky, that was really wrong for the CIA to do that, but they needed to find a way to covertly fund these arms deals to get the Sandinistas arms so that they could do their work, and of course the U.S. took their side of the deal.
Yeah.
And so that was the way they were doing it. I mean, you'd have to look at it and say, well, wait a minute, that's really illegal, unlawful. However, wouldn't it be better and cleaner if they could utilize these bonds to use some of these coupons in these bonds and not have to sell cocaine and run cocaine back and forth to the U.S. and God knows what they were doing. And so that was a much cleaner way of doing it. But in the end, I don't think they had enough money coming out of that. I think they were still running the cocaine heavily because those coupons and the interest coupons probably either weren't enough, or after they'd done a few of the coupons, they were stopped. That got terminated by the banks. I'm not sure exactly how they went about it. But we had the record of the coupons that had been used, and at that time, I stopped everything. And I said, look, well, I went back to the trust and said, look, you guys have given me the report that these coupons were used as blood money, basically, running guns and doing things that were unlawful. I'm not likely to continue working on this at all. I'm not going to work on it. This is not what I was told. But as I mentioned in my outline in one of our interviews, the CIA then got back to them. By that time, the Rothschilds were involved. The Clintons were involved. These trusts were involved. The CIA went back to the trust and said, no problem, we haven't used those coupons for years like that. Yes, they were on record, but they're clean now, blah, blah, blah. So they got back to me and said, okay, we're going to carry on doing the deal, the two trusts. Can you please help us finish it?
And you said okay.
And well, sort of, kind of okay. I mean, I was grumbling about it, and that's when I was contacted by the one CIA agent who said, you know, put your head down, finish the deal. I'm a cleaner. We're not going to put up with any nonsense. Here's what we're doing, and yes, this is how we're doing it. And they flew me down to Florida, and I met with this guy, and he basically showed me how they were setting up the bank. It was definitely a CIA covert bank.
What do you mean? What did he show you?
Well, now I'm getting into stuff that I probably shouldn't be revealing, but he basically showed me the structure of how they were going to set it up, and that
why would he do that? This was a CIA agent showing you,
yes,
someone who had indicated that he wasn't on board with their black op bank.
No, this particular agent was very much on board. In fact, he was
No,
one
no,
of
that
the.
you weren't. I'm saying, as soon as you said, "Hey, I don't approve of buying cocaine with coupons from these dirty bonds," I would think they would just kill you, not show you how the whole operation works.
No, no, they needed me. They needed me. The deal
Why
wasn't
though?
done yet.
But couldn't they just introduce any financial guy to this
No,
Liechtenstein
no, the
Rothschild?
deal wasn't done. Everybody trusted me. I was the center of all this stuff. Where if I went back to the trust and said don't do it,
I see.
they wouldn't have done it. I mean, these people really trusted me.
The trust.
Yeah, yeah. I guess that's sort of ironic, but no
But
pun,
you
no
had
pun
just
intended.
met them. Didn't the CIA introduce you to them?
No, by that time, early 1995, 96. This was by the middle of 97. All this stuff was going on. So I'd been working on this stuff for a year
Okay.
before I really found out what was really behind it and what was really going on.
It just seems to me that if the moment anyone in the criminal plan starts to exhibit morality, they would want that person out. But okay, so
Well, the CIA needed me in because I was still their contact. And these people wanted to do this deal really badly, and nobody wanted to disturb it because we're talking billions of dollars here. Nobody, and so I agreed then to finish the deal at that
Okay.
point in time
okay.
because at least I was told. And at that time they flew me down to Florida and started showing me. They introduced me to the representative from the Vatican, who was showing me all these wonderful projects they were going to build. So they just kept me going. I mean, ultimately they did dump me out of the deal. Ultimately I was thrown in prison. Ultimately, God knows why they didn't kill me, at least at that point in time, but thank God they didn't. But it may be that they just needed me for that much longer until they got it to the Federal Reserve and got it all done. And when it was all done, that's when all of a sudden I ended up in prison. I was picked up in Canada and ended up in prison.
Right. Okay.
So
let's
it
talk
may be
about-
that they never intended to pay me anything on it in the first
I
place.
think that's probably
Because
it.
assets can be used up if you get my drift. I didn't work directly for the CIA. I wasn't an employee. I was an asset.
Right.
Assets are expendable.
Yeah. Okay. So let's bridge the part from where they showed you how the whole banking operation worked, and then you still have these notes that need to be someone's paying. Why is the trust in Liechtenstein giving out the billion? What do they get?
They got their cut.
They got their cut.
From my end, I mean, I was going to get a cut. My commission that I got to share with the CIA agents that were involved was $20 million, and I've got that on the internet. I've got my pay order from Bay State Trust of $20 million US. My cut out
What
of
do you
that,
mean?
which I don't have recorded in there, was 5.7 million, but that ended up in the Canadian court. The rest of it was shared with the CIA agents that were involved.
Wow. So I got to take you back again, because again, a lot of this has got to do with my ignorance of banking. So you've got this note that's essentially a loan from the Japanese bank. Well, not a loan. It's a bond that they say, hey,
It's an asset that they've lodged at their bank that they've said, we're going to allow you to borrow against this asset.
But someday someone's going to come back and say, hey, give me the billion for this.
No, that would never happen. That's not the way that it was set up.
God, I don't understand how this works at all.
I mean, all they're doing is borrowing against an asset that ultimately they don't even have to repay.
That's crazy.
I mean, it's
Okay.
giving a money away to third world countries it's a very covert way of doing things. They get the money as long as they behave themselves, but they didn't behave themselves.
But in other
Now
words,
that's just my understanding of it all.
but then when you go to Liechtenstein, someone's giving you billions, right, of actual dollars.
Well, they weren't giving me billions.
I mean, they're paying out the money.
That's
Why?
right.
Why? What do they get for paying out that money?
Well, the bank is multiplying that money. When I say the multiplier, they're using the multiplier approach. They're multiplying that money in investments through the bank,
The
then
trust or the Japanese bank?
through the trusts.
What
All the Japanese bank ever did was provide the asset. The asset gets lodged in a European bank.
So somebody just prints up a fancy piece of paper that says, here, this is worth $1 billion, go get a loan.
Well, that's what these bonds are, is fancy pieces of paper that are printed up by banks and backed up by the bank. I mean, that's not.
But it's not the Japanese bank that's ultimately 50 years later giving you the money.
No, the Japanese bank just allowed them to use the asset to borrow against it. In other words, the Japanese bank agreed to confirm that this was a real note
That
and
they
that
had
it was a
issued.
real asset that they had issued, and then they could take that value, lodge it into a European bank, and create money out of that. And so what they did was they literally took that asset and they created what you call short-term, mid-term, and long-term notes. They sold those notes off to large investment institutions like pension funds and so on. And that's where the money get involved in the multiplier, where they start multiplying the amount of money that's against that note and the money that they're creating. And when they've multiplied it to a certain level, then the guys who put the deal together in the first place, distributions of the cash that came out of that would start being made. And obviously, starting out with a $6 billion note that ultimately was converted to $15 billion was quite an increase. I mean, that was quite a multiplier.
This is so crazy.
Oh, well, it may sound crazy, but it's quite a formal system. And I will tell you this, and again, I was told this, and I did my own research on it to confirm it. This multiplier effect that banks were using was originally introduced after World War II in order to do all the reconstruction work that was needed throughout Europe and around the world where countries and places were devastated. It wasn't supposed to continue on after that. And this was the Rothschild family that were involved in this, because they controlled a lot of the banks even back then. But in the end, after all the reconstruction was done, this particular method kind of went into the back room of the bank. And by very high level, very wealthy people, i.e. through the Rothschilds and so on, continue to use that for their own personal wealth, for their own personal needs, but even they couldn't overdo it, because when you're multiplying what they call M1, which is the money supply, the actual cash money supply in the global economic system, you want to do that very carefully. You don't want to do it too much, because you'll create inflation. In other words, you
blow out the whole thing.
You cause ripples in the system. People start to notice.
Right.
So they were continuing to use this system to create money for special projects and special purposes for themselves, and that's where they ended up getting the money out of these Mitsubishi notes. Now, I will tell you this. When I introduced this first note from the CIA to the Rothschild family as a trust, because I took it to them and said, "You're a private trust, can you do this?" They took it away. This particular guy took it away.
When you say do this, what?
Can you transact this note? Can you basically do something with this note to transact it? Because they didn't want to just get money.
What's the transacting? I come to you with the note, I leave with $15 billion?
That's right. Can you do something with this note?
That's the magic that I'm trying to get to.
Well, that's something I can't tell you.
Oh, really? Why?
Because it's a very specialized, very secret system in the banking system.
You know it, but you can't tell me.
I can't tell you that.
What do you mean?
That would be breaching a confidentiality agreement that would be going right off the deep end for me. And
You'd be killed if you told me.
I think I would be, yeah. I really do think I would be. And for anybody else out there, you see a lot of this stuff on the internet. For anybody else out there who knows of this system and who've tried to utilize it, it's always that there's a ring of fraud around it. It's like a moat around a castle, where anybody that tries to get in, oh no, this has never been that way. You're a liar. You're committing fraud, and so you really can't get into the center. Somehow, I was catapulted right to the center of it, taken to the banks, shown the system, shown how it works.
Why would they do that?
That was the Rothschild. That was that particular member of the Rothschild family.
But why?
Well, he trusted me.
Why? Come on, after a year? It's not like you grew up knowing this guy.
I think I mentioned this, and this is going to sound a little crazy, but whenever I sat down with him and I told him from I'm going to call it a spiritual gifts perspective, and he was a Messianic Jew, and I told him some of the things that I felt. I mean, even before I knew who he was or where he was from, I said, I'm seeing something here, and here's what I'm seeing. And I started to tell him, and he got everybody out of the room, and he said, all right, tell me what you're seeing, because I do believe in the spiritual gifts. And I said, I see several people in your family who are about to retire. I see that you're the next blood relative coming up for the position. I see that they're very, very high level in the world banking system. And as I began to map this thing out for him, he then kicked the rest of the guys out of the room and said, oh my God, you really do have a spiritual gift here. That's exactly what's going on. That's exactly who I am. Because I didn't have any idea this was a Rothschild at the time. He said, I want to take you with me because I've just entered into the family. I have been sort of exiled from the family until my 30s. I haven't been in a part of the banking system, but I need somebody to work with me who understands the banking system and who understands how these things work. So I'm taking you with me. And I was literally catapulted to the middle of this system, right to. I mean, it wasn't. A month later, maybe 2 months. He had me over in Zurich. I went into the bank of Credit Suisse, right to the boardrooms with the Bay State Trust gal. Then he put me in his car, drove me to Liechtenstein, took me into the vaults of the bank in Liechtenstein, showed me the previous notes that he'd already been given to work through this system. I mean, we're talking billion-dollar notes out of some of the Eastern European countries. I mean, this is a bizarre story. I will admit that. But I can tell you, I experienced it. I mean, anybody who wants to look me in the eye and defy that I'm telling the truth, I've got a lot of the documentation. I've got notebooks on it. I've got notebooks on all the meetings. These are the things that I've not revealed, nor am I going to reveal. And the way the system works, I'm not going to reveal that.
All right.
I mean, people ask, why am I still alive? Well, I've got some thoughts around that that I can't share, but I am still here. And I was picked out of, God knows how many people that are out there that could have been picked for this position. But when this guy finally picked me for this position because I was spiritually compatible with who he was and what he wanted, and I also had the expertise behind it, which he just felt he couldn't find that anywhere. He wanted somebody who was spiritually compatible and financially compatible.
Wow.
And the reason it didn't work, quite frankly, ultimately, was because the guy had become a Messianic Jew in the middle of a Rothschild family who were Orthodox Jews, and that was just a real difference. And then he tries to bring me in, being a Gentile, to work with him. And I remember telling him, how in the world do you think you're going to make this work? Even when I went to Zurich with him, he was staying in a family compound, and he said, I'm sorry, you can't stay in the compound because you're a Gentile, and I can't let you go into any of those places, but I'm going to take you to the Liechtenstein Bank, I'm going to take you to the vaults, I'm going to show you exactly what we're doing and how we're doing it, and my family are not going to stop me. Well, in the end, I think they did stop him, quite frankly, because ultimately the Rothschild family stepped in to work directly with the CIA and with Marilyn Perry of Bay State Trust. He was booted out. He was picked up in London and fined $75,000 for dealing with fraudulent documents. I mean, goodness gracious, billion-dollar documents, 75 grand.
Yeah,
he could have pulled
weird.
that out of his wallet. And I was picked up in Canada and put in prison. And ultimately, the deal got finished without us. And I think what I ended up doing in the introductions that I made was ultimately bringing the Clintons together with the Rothschild family, together with the CIA. That's a combination. That's a killer combination, and I'm not punning when I say that.
Now, okay, we haven't...
And now we've got a funding out there that these three groups, and you can call them the shadow government if you want, but I believe it's a shadow government that's a lot bigger than the USA. With Clinton flying around the world, you saw her the other day, how cocky she was. She doesn't care what Donald Trump or the U.S. thinks anymore. She's in a much higher position right now.
Well, she was mocking Trump.
Oh, yeah.
openly.
She's in a much higher position right now to be able to get away with stuff like that between the Rothschilds and the CIA. She doesn't care what people in the U.S. think about her anymore. I really believe that she's now working with the Rothschilds on a much bigger plan, and the CIA could easily be, or at least a covert position in the CIA, that could easily be their enforcement arm. This is what people don't know that is frightening to me. It may be why, no matter how hard I try to expose this whole thing, I can't get media. I mean, let's face it. I think Hugh probably told you this. The CIA have a way with dealing with the media. They have deals with the media, especially the mainstream media around the world, that nobody prints anything that they don't want them to print.
Right. Yeah.
And so they control the global media, but what they don't control, thank God, is they don't control people like you, the blogs and the other people who are out there really trying to get the truth out.
Well, I think they have other methods of trying to control how information is coming out from sources like mine. I think they, obviously, if they put top-level, assets and people after me, it almost lends too much credibility. They need to send, foolish people to try to make me look foolish. But
well, they'll do everything they can to discredit you.
That's right.
That's what they did to me. Ultimately, they discredited me. Even locally here, they even put me in bankruptcy.
Right.
for no good reason without even giving a decent hearing to do that.
Well, let me keep you on the Clinton aspect here, because we've heard a lot about the banking notes, and I've got a better understanding of that now. How do you feel the Clintons? What information do you have that tells you that the Clintons became involved?
Well, that's easy. I mean, all the documentation I have shows that Bill Clinton was right in the middle of it, and we've got correspondence, we've got faxes, we've got other things that, and communication back and forth between me and other people with the CIA that talking about Bill Clinton specifically.
Really? And that's on
my website.
luminadiem.com.
That's right, the luminadiem.com website in section 7. If you look through that, you'll even see some sequencing in there where when certain people were picked up in this sort of guise, if you want to call it that, this sort of, well, oh my goodness, the Mitsubishi note is fraudulent. We're going to pick these guys up, we're going to find them, and we're going to, take the note, blah, blah, blah. Well, ultimately the note was exchanged for $15 billion in treasury bills. Ultimately the deal did go down, and my sense is that with the other 11, I was told from the original that these deals were big enough that they didn't want to make ripples in the financial system throughout the world, so they would only do like one of these a year. And the first one at $6 billion was the smallest.
Wow.
But I helped to set up the system that all they had to do was feed this into the system with these trusts, one a year, or if they got greedy, maybe more than one, I don't know. And they could continue to fund this stuff in the tens of billions, possibly even the hundreds of billions of dollars before it was all over with, because 34 of them,
Yeah.
you add the numbers up.
Well, it's astounding, huge amount of money. So,
But they're not afraid, and you can understand why. They're the guys with the gold. They make the rules. Nobody seems to be attacking them. Nobody's going to question them, and everybody's trying to make us, those of us who are actually putting the truth out, and maybe even especially me, look like a nutcase. Believe me, I've been checked out. I'm not a nutcase.
right. Now, okay, so you went to Liechtenstein with this Mitsubishi bank note. Mitsubishi Bank said...
No, didn't go to Liechtenstein with a note. I went to Liechtenstein. I went to Zurich. The note was... Nobody ever gave me the original note. I was always an intermediary. They kept me out of... In fact, when the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, came to try to do something to me, they finally figured out that as an intermediary, they really couldn't do anything to me, especially when I showed them it was a true deal. But when I went there, copy of the note was faxed to me. I shared it with the first trustee, which was the Bay State Trust. She looked at it, had it checked out to a certain degree, and said, "Wow, this thing is real. Where'd you get it? It's a bit too big for me." And I said, "Well, what about if I bring another guy in who also has a trust in Liechtenstein?" And I contacted Sergio, who was ultimately a member of the Rothschild family. He flew over immediately. I mean, within 24 hours, he was in Zurich from Colorado. I introduced the two of them. They put the deal together, and the rest of it is history. But I never laid my hands on the original note, ever. I got a fax copy of it, and I was forced to destroy that.
Now, you also said that at some point the Mitsubishi Bank said that it was real, but they would claim it was fraud.
As long as it remained covert, as long as it wasn't made public, they were happy to back it.
So why would they say that?
Well, because it was embarrassing for them.
Why?
Because they're continuing to pay for World War II, and they're not doing a very good job of saving face.
You sure
if that's the
it?
case. Well, that's what I was told. And that made some sense to me.
Yeah, that doesn't sound
But
like
when the deal, I can tell you one thing, when they approved it, because they knew it was real, we had already checked it out with the Bank of International Settlement. We checked it out through the Central Bank of Japan. So for them to say that it wasn't real or would have been kind of silly, but they continued to do that until we finally said, "Look, you really can't get away with that because we've already checked it out, the origin and everything." So they said, "All right, we will allow that the deal will go forward. We'll back the note as real, as long as it doesn't come out publicly. If it comes out publicly, we will publicly say that it's fraud." And that's exactly what happened. When I was picked up in Canada, unfortunately, they didn't anticipate that I had my briefcase with me and that they had my files with me. So this thing came out in Canadian court.
Wait a minute. So what was in those files?
Copies of a lot of the communications, just all my notes on the deal that we were working. Gosh, I don't remember all the documents and paperwork, but there was enough in there that...
Did it have that fax of the note?
No, I didn't have no, I had to destroy that. But the Canadian courts, through the U.S. Justice Department, did their own checking, and if you went back and looked at the transcripts from the Canadian court case that was against me, they actually, the U.S. Justice Department came in and said, we have checked this out, we have gone to Florida, we've done some work on this, and we can tell you, Your Honor, this deal is real. They actually opened that up in the Canadian court.
No, I don't doubt that it's real. I'm just trying to think about reasons why the Bank of Japan would react that way. And
well, when it was made public, they basically said it was a fraud.
Right, because you see, I don't think it's a matter of being embarrassed and losing face. I think it's a matter of, I believe, the CIA or any kind of covert operation like this. One of the primary things.
Well, they don't want it to be told that they're involved in anything like that, for sure.
Right.
Yeah,
they
for
need
sure.
someone or something with credibility that can be the front-facing entity, and that's the bank. So the bank is basically being grabbed around the throat and used as the instrument that will create this thing.
Yeah, but again, it's not a public thing. I mean, they agreed to do
Right.
that strictly with another bank to bank with another bank, saying
Right,
yes, we'll back it, but you guys lay low.
Right.
And
So
when
the
it- when it
CIA
wasn't-
is the ones telling them
When
to
it
do
when it
that.
became somewhat public, then they publicly said it was fraud, but they didn't count on me again.
But the reason why they would publicly say it's fraud is that then they can stick you in jail for fraud and the whole story goes away because that guy's a fraud, the note isn't real, it never happened, the whole deal goes away.
And they tried to do that. If you recall, when I was told by my attorney that the SEC wanted to see me,
Yeah.
I said, you make an appointment, we will meet with him in your office. And he said, oh my God, are you sure you want to do that? They're saying that what you were doing was fraud. And I said, well, I'm going to show them it's not fraud. Because by that time I'd gotten out on bail from the Canadian in Canada. I had put together all my documentation and all the stuff that I had showing that the deal had been checked out through Geneva, through Central Bank, through all this other stuff. And I took all this stuff with me in a box. And when the SEC representatives, high level, straight from Washington, came in and said, you know, we're going to arrest you, I said, no, you're not. And my attorney said, no, you're not. I said, why would you arrest me? Well, because you were dealing with fraudulent instrument. I said, I'll prove to you right now it's not fraud. And I started pulling all this stuff out and showing it to them. They looked at some of it. They said, wait a minute. One of the guys went away. It was a guy and a gal. Made some phone calls, came back and said, and he looked at some other things, and he went back and made another phone call, came back. By the way, this is all in a transcript that's on my website.
Wow.
Came back and said, we're done here. My attorney is going, wait a minute. You walk in my office, you tell this guy that you're going to get him arrested, and they even wanted to cooperate with Colorado to have me sent to Colorado for all the garbage that John Suthers was doing. They wanted to give me back to Colorado. And
The SEC did.
Yeah. And my attorney said, no, you're not going to do any of that. This guy's here to help you. If you don't want his help, then get the hell out of my office. We're not going to put up with any of that.
But they were ultimately satisfied that it was not fraud and
Well, that's
not fraud on your part.
That's a manner of speaking. After they looked at it twice and made a couple of phone calls, they just said, we're done here. And my attorney said, what do you mean we're done here? What the hell is this? What's going on here?
Did you ever hear anything more from them?
Not a peep. They packed up their stuff, and I said, look, I've got all the documentation. Would you like this? Because these are copies. Nope. We don't want any of it. We don't want to see anything else. We're done here. There's nothing more for us to do here. And we followed them in the elevator.
Wow.
They got in the elevator. My attorney's going, well, wait a minute. How can I contact you? What's going on? You're going to get back with us? Elevator closed. They were gone. We faxed them. My attorney phoned them. We wrote them letters. Gone.
Something in that documentation scared them.
Well, I'll tell you what scared them. They saw it was real. And they had already reported to the world that it was fraud, and they didn't want to report anything any different than that. That's what scared them.
So when did your problems, in other words, we know from previous interviews that you were grabbed off the street in Canada. And
No, I was grabbed in my home. My children were grabbed off the street.
Sorry. But you were essentially snatched, stuck in a prison.
That's right.
Maximum security, supermax, underground,
That's right.
room.
They call them the dormitories, the underground dormitories. They tried to make it sound nice.
But this was a very uncomfortable and horrible, particularly terrible prison.
That's right. Even when the federal officers came to pick me up to take me down to Colorado at one point, they walked into the place and they looked at me and they said, where in the hell did this place come from? I've seen, I said, he said to me, you're going to think you're in a five-star hotel when we take you down to our jails in Colorado. He said, this place is god-awful. You know, we didn't even know this existed. And I said, I don't think Canadians knew it existed either.
And it no longer exists.
Now it no longer exists, that's right.
Right. So what's the time frame from when the trusts transacted this note to when things started to fall out? Why didn't they continue to work with you? Why did they want to stick you in jail and have the cleaner kill everybody else involved? Talk about that bit a little bit.
Because I was so concerned about my children, in the middle of this deal, I found out that my wife, who's now my ex-wife, was abusing the kids again, and that was something that was going on in family court when in the middle of working this deal. She
Not
was
Carolyn, your
no,
first
no,
wife.
no, no. She was supposed to be. It was Dearna. She was supposed to be working with a nanny, which was what was required through social services when I reported her for abusing the kids. So we had everything arranged so that I could still travel, and she would be working with a nanny, and everybody. Well, she fired the nanny, and she started abusing the kids. So I had to stop in the middle of all this, even though my handler, the CIA handler, said, "Don't you dare go back to the States for anything." And I said, "Look, my kids are far more important. I don't care what you say to me. I'm going to go down there and deal with this."
Why were you in Canada dealing with this? What was the need for that?
I was sent to Canada by Bay State Trust to look at Chinese projects that could be funded. Once this thing was funded, the Bay State Trust wanted to also finance some Chinese projects, which at the time were coal-fired power plants. So I was up in Canada working with these guys.
How did you go from transacting banknotes to dealing with Chinese power plants? Why would they want you to do that?
The original pay order was given to me not by the CIA. The pay order was given to me by Bay State Trust. So I worked for Bay State Trust more than I worked for the CIA. And at that point in time, she said, "I want you to go to Canada. I want you to talk to these guys, because once we're done transacting this thing and you've done as much as you can do, then I'd like to see whether or not we can finance some projects in China." So I went to meet with these guys.
Just because they liked you, they wanted to do more business with you.
Oh, Bay State Trust? Are you kidding? I brought them a $6 billion deal, and they were doing handsprings for the stuff that I brought them.
Got it.
And I got to know Marilyn Perry really well. I spent 6 weeks with her in the summer of 1996 over in Zurich, going through all the stuff that she was working on and really getting to know her pretty well.
Is she still alive?
Yeah, I think she is. In fact,
What does she say about
somebody tried to reach her. I think a local investigative reporter tried to reach her less than a year ago, got her on the phone, and she hung up on him. She wouldn't talk to him
About any of this?
about anything. She basically said, I'm not talking to you about any of this," and she hung up on him. So, and what's interesting is that I think she's actually still at the same address. I've actually got a map on how to get to her place on the internet in Section 7.
Okay.
Because in the end, she betrayed me big time, and I have no place for her at all.
Tell me what happened with that.
Well, when I was put in jail in Canada, I contacted her, and she had lots of power. We're talking about a woman with a huge amount of power. And I said, "You need to help me, because I brought you all this stuff, and everything's going forward. I need your help." And she refused to help me or even get involved to be a witness for me or anything.
Wow.
So I just said, "All right, you drop me, I'll drop you."
How do you know she doesn't work for the CIA?
She didn't like the CIA. She didn't like the idea that the CIA was going to be involved in this in the first place. She was very cautious about the CIA. But I think it was, for her, it was the amount of money that she was going to do and what her trust could get done. And I think in combining herself with the other trust that made her feel comfortable to go ahead with the deal. Because she said from the original, she wouldn't do this by herself with her own trust. She had to have another trust involved.
Okay.
And I think in the end, finding out who the other trust was also made a huge impression on her as well.
What do you mean?
Well, finding out that it was
That
the
it was
Rothschilds.
Rothschilds.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I don't think she had that kind of a connection up to that point.
I
She had
see.
lots of connections, but I don't think she had that one.
So that doesn't seem, I don't understand why she wouldn't help you if you've done all this great stuff for her.
Good question. In the end, everybody abandoned me. I became persona non grata. Maybe because the CIA had turned against me and they were all afraid of them. I'm not sure why, but ultimately I was basically thrown to the pigs, so to speak.
Or the wolves. as
Or the
it were.
wolves, yeah. I mean, you don't want to get thrown in a pig pen either. They're pretty vicious.
Okay. So you're in Canada. You're dealing with Bay State Trust wants you to look into Chinese investment deals, and you meet these Chinese guys who you understand to just be businessmen.
There were businessmen who were presenting Chinese projects, power plants, coal-fired power plants.
How did it go from coal-fired power plants to cave-dwelling gold-bearer bonds?
Yeah, that's a good question. After I had met with the SEC and the SEC backed off, then I got the call through my attorney that the president's attorney wanted to meet with me.
Gregory Craig.
Gregory Craig. These guys were close enough to me, and they were waiting for the Mitsubishi deal to get done. And these guys were
The Chinese.
I saw them as Chinese operatives.
What do you mean, though? Why would you deal with Chinese operatives? Isn't
Because,
that
well,
dealing with spies?
if you go look at Section 7, you'll find that the Bank of China and other groups out of China were also involved in the Mitsubishi deal to confirm the note and confirm the deal. And it may be that China was involved because China was still the one who was probably the most harmed by Japan. I'm not sure why, but I can tell you that the Bank of China was involved. So I didn't really go out of my way to ask these guys a lot of questions. I figured, okay, fine, you're from China, you want us to do these coal-fired plants. I don't care who you are or what's going on, I'm happy to work with you. So we were all working on this thing together. They knew that the money coming out of the Mitsubishi deal was going to help to fund this stuff. But then they ultimately found out that I was going to be meeting with Gregory Craig. They were concerned about me because by that time I'd been in jail, I'd gotten out of jail, I was on bail, and I was going to go directly to Gregory Craig when he wanted to meet with me. Because getting out of jail put the U.S. in some pretty big jeopardy. They wanted to keep me in jail and get me across the border so they could shut me up.
So you were in jail in Canada?
That's right.
And so why did you get out of jail? Because of the bail from Carl Dare.
That's right.
They didn't anticipate you'd be
They
able
put
to
the
make
bail at
that
$600,000 thinking there's no way I'd ever come up with that.
They had to know that Carl Dare was your
They
father-in-law.
didn't know that at the time. I wasn't married to Carolyn yet.
Oh.
Carolyn was my girlfriend at the time. Carolyn stepped into the middle of it, got her mother and her father to back us up, and her father put his name on the line for a $600,000 bail.
Interesting.
And the U.S. didn't anticipate that, so I got out, and it was right after I got out, I met with the SEC, and then all of a sudden, in comes Gregory Craig, and I had to go meet with him, and these guys found out that I was going to be meeting with the president's attorney.
I see.
So then
Chinese guys.
That's right. Then they met with me privately at a hotel in Kitchener, which is outside of Toronto.
Right.
And they said to me, well, yes, we do have some power plants in China, but we've also got something else here. And since you're going to be meeting with the president's attorney, here's what we would like you to do for us. And then they revealed themselves as operatives for the Chiang Kai-shek stuff. And that's how I got involved in that. That's right.
The gold bearer.
Gold
so you
bearer
somehow got tagged on a list as the guy who can transact insanely valuable, totally crazy, covert bonds.
Yeah. Well, they knew that I was connected with the Bay State Trust and with the Mitsubishi stuff, and they knew those were billion-dollar bonds. So why not? I mean, even if it's not a spiritual thing, and this guy in China who was the cave trustee said that I was the one, so to speak. Even if you set that aside.
He said that? The cave guy
Oh,
said
yeah.
that? Are you sure these guys aren't pulling your leg, Harmon?
Well,
to just tell you this?
Let's assume they were. Okay? I mean, I'm open to that. But I can tell you that I told them things that they said there's no way that I mean, when they came to me and they said, this is what we've been told about you by this guy in China, this priest who apparently had a vision on who was going to do this deal.
They knew you by name from some priest in China?
No, they knew me by name because I'd gotten to know them, but they didn't know when I was born. There was a lot of things about me they didn't know. This guy told them that.
The priest in China?
Yeah, so when I gave them my driver's license and they checked me out, they came back to me and said, all right, as far as we can tell, you're the one. Now let's set that aside for a moment.
Sure.
That's a pretty fantastic story.
Yeah.
Try to imagine, they're trying to get, these bonds are due, they're 50-year bonds, it's 1999, the one that they gave me was issued originally in 1949, which was my year of birth, by the way.
Oh.
And I was 50 years old, which again, is that a coincidence? I don't know. And it's a 50-year bond. But they came to me and said, okay, we would like you to go to the president's attorney. We'd like this to be presented to the president because these bonds are now matured. They can be cashed, and to try to find a way to get it done. We also know that you're working with these kinds of bonds at high levels with this other thing. So it makes sense that if you're going to go visit with the president's attorney, why don't you present this to him and see what the president can do for us?
What was he going to do? He doesn't run a trust. Why present it to Gregory Craig?
Well, because he'd take it directly to Bill Clinton, who would take it to the Treasury Department to confirm that these things were real.
The Chinese
Because the
guys
Treasury
weren't
Department has a record of all this stuff.
So this was U.S. government issued bonds that the Chinese
Signed by
had,
the Treasury Department when they were originally issued back in 1949, blah, blah, blah.
and the Chinese guys were like, "Hey, we'd like the money. Make
That's right.
sure it's real."
That's right. We would like to be able to transact, again, I use the word transact these bonds on behalf of the Chinese people.
Cash them out. Get
That's
the
right.
money.
That's right. Or get something out of them. But we know we're not going to get anything done unless the government of the United States of America recognizes them.
So that's why they wanted you to meet with Gregory.
And so at the highest level, meeting with the president's attorney, who can take it to the Treasury Department to at least confirm them.
Mm-hmm.
And they also knew, as I told you before, that there were certain mistakes in the bonds that were programmed in, and that's why they showed me the plates with the...
Who knew that? The treasury of the Chinese guys.
Yeah, that's right. And they had the original letters that issued the bonds. They had the original plates that printed the bonds. I mean, they had it all, and they said all this has to come together in order for these bonds to be cashed. That was part of the original deal. And in the letter that they had, that was the original letter that was issued by the Treasury Department, the letter even described all this stuff. If you don't have all this, then you're somebody who's got a hold of these bonds that shouldn't have them. As far as we're concerned, they're fraud.
Got it. Got it.
So they had it all, though. They said we've got it all. They took the laser copies, the color laser copies of this stuff, high resolution copies. I let Gregory Craig see the originals. He just about crapped himself.
Yeah, we've seen the emails. That's definitely on the
That's
website.
right. And then he took we let him take the laser copies to the Treasury Department to get their feedback. When we got their feedback was pretty much what we expected.
Which is what?
Which was yes, these are high grade, high quality things. There are some mistakes in it, which would lead us to believe that they could be fraudulent. We expected that.
Why would they put those mistakes in there on purpose?
So that no one else could cash them.
What do you mean no one else? Or just who put them in there? I thought the U.S. government put them in there.
That did.
Oh, so they issue them with mistakes so that when you come back in 50 years, they say it's fraud. Get
Unless
the hell
you've
outta
got the plates, unless you've got the original letters and all the other
here.
stuff to
Because
go with
the
it.
plate would indicate that it's not fraud.
That's right.
Uh-huh.
That's right.
Okay. That I got. Okay. So
Now, wait a minute, though. Because this was originally issued to the Chiang Kai-shek government, which was the Chinese government at the time, one of the arguments that the U.S. has that apparently hasn't held up all that well, but it has held up, was that, well, wait a minute, you're no longer the Chinese government. The Chinese government was replaced by the Chinese communists. Therefore, these bonds are no longer any good. Well, that argument doesn't. Yeah, that argument doesn't fly very well when it's signed by the U.S. Treasury Department and the Treasurer at the time, and they were open-ended bearer bonds.
yeah, the whole purpose of the bearer bond is that whoever bears it gets the dough, right?
But in that particular instance, whoever bears that, the original letter of transfer, and the plates, everything that goes with it.
Like
So that doesn't fly really well. And there have been some rumors, according to these Chinese guys, that there's a way to get them done that the Treasury Department has set up, but as long as they could be done quietly. Because keep in mind, this debt, which is now easily in the trillions of dollars, after all these years, this debt, if it were ever recorded against the existing U.S. debt, would be big trouble.
Would sink the economy.
To sink the U.S. economy and sink the global economy.
Wow. So you're really describing some of the biggest, problems with the global financial system, and these secret transactions it's really astounding. So, okay, the Chinese gold bearer bonds, those got cashed out, or what happened with that?
Don't know.
You don't know?
I have no idea.
Okay, so
I was taken out of it, and
that was when you got arrested and stuck in the
that's right.
4 months underground.
Now I can tell you that the same two agents that met with me in Canada came to New Zealand after we escaped. That's right, and those are the guys that I showed you on the last interview where I had to redact everything out. But I showed you that I had their I wouldn't work with them unless they gave them their passports as well as police reports.
Right.
So I had all that, as well as the letter from the cave trustee when Carolyn made a donation to sort of help them out. They gave a letter back, and the letter turned out to be even though it was sort of a thank you letter, because it was in the old script, because it was in an old dialect.
That was the proof that this
mystical guy was real.
Right.
It's a crazy story. It's the kind of thing that movies are made out of, but not necessarily reality.
Well, so okay, let's go back to you in prison underground in Canada for 4 months. Why didn't they just leave you there? Why'd they let you out?
because I got bail because the
Oh,
Canadian
that's
government
where the bail.
the Canadian government let me out.
Okay. So they let you
They
out.
couldn't continue to hold me. They couldn't justify holding me when I agreed to pay
No
the bail.
charges. Right. So you get out of jail. You went back to where? Colorado?
No, no. I
Stayed
stayed
in
in Canada for nearly 2 years during the appeal because when I got out of jail, that was when we had filed an appeal. I'd lost the extradition case. I think I told you with Phil Freitag, the investigator.
Right.
He was the guy who was also doing the mediation services. They said that he had conspired with me to commit extortion.
Right.
In the end, he hadn't done that at all, so his charges were dropped. But they had already approved the extradition. So then I went back in jail. I filed for an appeal, and that's when the Canadian attorney got me out on bail during the appeal period. And it was during that 2-year period that I started putting all my documentation together, and that's when I was visiting with people like Gregory Craig and the U.S. State Department and so on. I mean, the Securities and Exchange Department.
Now this is interesting. So when was that this all happened with it? Because the thing I'm getting at now is the making up of false charges about conspiracy, etc. Now that basically after I made it public that I'm here in New Zealand to meet with you, there have been a lot of false charges made up about me. And it's interesting how we start trying to reveal some more of these details about this situation, how it's attempting to be shut down. So when did your next major problem happen after you were bailed out of jail in Canada? What was the sequence after that?
Well, within about a 2-year period, I was more concerned about my children than anything else. I mean, we had tried to follow, we had a correspondence campaign with everybody you could imagine. Congressmen, senators, high-level people in Canada, and it was all about my kids. It was my kids, number one, because they'd been put back in child abuse, and I wanted that situation squared away, and I wanted them brought to safety. So we were writing to everybody, and in the end, we got an attorney out of Colorado to come up and visit me, and he and I both agreed that I needed to get my butt back down to Colorado and confront this stuff, that's what you'd ordinarily do. So I then made a deal with the district attorney's office in Colorado that if I came back to Colorado, they wouldn't arrest me.
And that was Southers at the time.
That's right. I could go before the court and ask for a dismissal because the charges were nonsense.
Right.
But then they reneged on that deal because what I did was then I dropped the appeal because the appeal was what was keeping me safely in Canada. I let go of the appeal to honor that deal, and as soon as I let go of the appeal, they sent up an order to have me rearrested. They put me back in the Canadian jail. They put me in handcuffs and belly chains and leg irons, and 2 federal officers came up, picked me up, and they took me back down to Colorado, and that's when the really big trouble started. I mean, that was really some bad stuff. They put me in a federal prison.
That was worse than
the original charges were. I didn't even get a chance. I never got before the judge to get the original charges challenged or dismissed. I was standing in front of the court literally to go in and get that done when 2 federal marshals came and they said, "We're arresting you now on federal charges." Of course.
What were the charges?
Child support.
How is that a federal charge?
Well.
Oh, because it's across state lines. They're saying you weren't paying child support?
Well, but imagine this. I'm in Canada. Canada won't allow me to work.
Why?
Well, they just wouldn't.
What do you mean? Oh, because you're not a citizen.
I wasn't a citizen. I was out on bail with these charges that had been originally put against me, and I was in the middle of an appeal, and they wouldn't let me work. So during that 2-year period, of course I wasn't paying child support. They wouldn't allow me to work. So when they got me back down there and they put me in federal prison for not paying child support, and I had a case with that I could utilize against it, my attorney in Canada said if they extradite you, they can only extradite you and they can only deal with you on the original charges, which was that not showing up for a custody order and the extortion charge, which was nonsense. But when I went to go into a court to actually challenge those charges, they arrested me on federal charges of not paying child support.
And is that normally a federal charge, not paying?
Well, in the U.S. nowadays, they've elevated it to a federal level, so they could actually get you for that.
Okay.
But then my attorney in Canada got involved. He got another attorney in Colorado, and they said they've just violated the Hague Commission Treaty, which was the extradition treaty between the 2 countries, because they actually broke the treaty by arresting me on something brand new that had nothing to do with the extradition. If you get my drift. So that's when, after 3 weeks in a federal prison, and another 4 nights in the drunk tank at the Denver City Jail, which wasn't supposed to happen. And I finally ended up getting out of jail. They had to let me go, give me my passport back, and I went back to Canada.
Okay. And then, so is it from Canada that you came to New Zealand?
That's right.
So you just figured, this is enough. I've been thrown in jail for no reason too
When
many
I got back
times.
to Canada, I had no charges against me. I was a free man. But I just had a bad feeling about it, and so did Carolyn. I wasn't going to remain free very, very long. They would cook up something else creative. So it was that point in time we started getting strange phone calls at Carolyn's residence when we had a P.O. box. Nobody knew where we were. And they were going to try to deliver Federal Express packages to us that didn't exist and so on. So I said, look, something's wrong here. We need to get out of here.
Right.
So we were warned. We went up to Ottawa. We drove all the way across Canada in a friend's van. We were in Vancouver Island for a short period of time to try to see what was going on. And then along came the Chinese guys,
Yeah.
who really wanted me to continue working with them because they still saw me as the one guy who could do the Chinese stuff. They helped to get me out of Canada without getting picked up into Hong Kong.
Now, so are they Chinese operatives? Was that illegal for
Well,
you to be dealing with them?
I can't tell you how much power they had or exactly what level they were, but I managed to leave. I mean, imagine me leaving Canada with my passport without being picked up by the CIA.
So they were able to secret you out of Canada somehow.
How they did it, I don't know, but they told me to go ahead and go to the airport and leave. Wow. Everything would be all right. When I got to Hong Kong, they had people meet me in Hong Kong. They gave us some money, and they basically watched over us for a 6-week period. Then they contacted me and said, look, the CIA now know you're not in Canada. Hong Kong's not going to be safe for you because it now belongs to China. Mm-hmm. That was after the Chinese had turned it over, or the British had turned it over to China. You need to get out of Hong Kong. I said, where am I going to go? They said, we don't know, but you need to leave. So that's when we went to the Lonely Planet book and in the library in Hong Kong, and we decided to go to New Zealand.
Right, where we are right now.
That's right.
But of course, when you came here, what led to you relinquishing U.S. citizenship?
I was here for a period of time on my U.S. passport. I'd actually gotten a business visa, and so did Carolyn.
And you opened a number of businesses.
And we opened up a number of businesses here.
Prior to the earthquakes,
that's right.
Many were very successful.
And I'd actually traveled. I didn't go back to the U.S. I knew better than that, but I'd actually traveled to Zurich, Switzerland, and met with some people there because the technology that we had generated was an IT VoIP technology that we had generated with the servers around the world. We went to Zurich to try to open up some avenues and some businesses in Europe, and we were working with those guys. And I traveled back and forth a couple of times to get that set up to Germany and to Switzerland. And I got back to New Zealand at one point in around, it was somewhere in early to mid 2004. And my passport, even though it wasn't expired, didn't have any more places to put stamps.
Ah, yes.
So I either needed to have pages added or I needed a new passport. So I turned my passport into the U.S. consulate.
And they just saw it as an opportunity.
And they wouldn't give it back to me. They said, you're going back to the U.S.
Why, though? There were no charges against
you. They
said,
we have issues that you need to deal with.
Wow.
And so I said to Carolyn, I went to my attorney and I said, this is not going to happen. They're going to take me down. I can't let this happen. Yeah. So I went to my attorney and I said, what are my options? And we looked and we looked and we looked, and he said, I'm not sure what they are. And then through my own research, I found out that I could renounce my U.S. citizenship because I was you can only do that if you're outside the country. So I went to and my attorney went with me. We went to the U.S. consulate in Auckland. I renounced my U.S. citizenship to the consular's shock.
Right.
Because he said, well, who in the world would do that? And I renounced it. I gave them all the documentation. I filled out all their forms. And within a month, I got a statement back from the U.S. that was stamped by the U.S. State Department saying you're no longer a U.S. citizen. It's irrevocable. So I think they did that because they knew that they would be completely rid of me and that I couldn't return to the U.S. and I couldn't bother them anymore. I think that's why they did that.
Well, that's the moment that you became America's first refugee.
Well, more or less, yeah.
But yet
because I tried to get residency in New Zealand, and they turned me down. So then I tried for political asylum. They turned me down. Then I appealed that. They turned me down. And around 2006, 2007 was when I was told that I had to leave. And of course, I couldn't leave because I couldn't leave or be deported. Right. So that's when I filed that case with the UN Human Rights Commission.
And
that was accepted.
I think what we should do, Harmon, because it is getting a little late here in New Zealand, I think we've covered a lot of ground, and
We
this
have.
has been a very understandable
And we've left it off with the UN, and I think that's an interesting place to leave it because I'd like to go through that.
Another one tomorrow, all
bet.
about everything with your human rights case and all of that.
Well, if not tomorrow, soon. I think you mentioned to Carolyn that we wanted to continue the DARE one tomorrow, but we'll do it however you like, whatever makes sense.
All right. Well, Harmon, thank you for clarifying all that, and thank you for helping me understand. I think people are going to have a much better understanding of the situation that you're in. And while I'm here in New Zealand, we'll continue to do more of these interviews.
I defy anybody to challenge me on any of this because I can produce the documentation. Ultimately, I will produce the notebooks and everything I've got, but I would prefer to do that with Donald Trump or somebody that's a representative of his, because this will help him completely remove the Clintons from the political landscape. What I have will help him do that, and he has had to put up with so much trouble. She's getting so cocky, I'm telling you, she has elevated herself to a level that Donald Trump needs to take care of that. Believe me, he needs to take care of that. She's never going to get off his back unless he talks to me and we can together bring them down and finish it. And I'd love to help Charles Ortel as well, because he's been at that for years as well. So Charles, let's work on this together.
Absolutely. And we can end this with a little hashtag lock her up.
That's it.
Harmon, thank you so much.
You're welcome. My pleasure.